Methodist Episcopal Church. It seems that in every election cycle, someone is sure to say how important the upcoming election is. The narrative goes something like this: this is the most critical election in a generation. Well, this time we really mean it. We can't stress strongly enough just how crucial this election is. Up and down the ballot, national, state, and local elections. Voting is not only our civic duty, it is also our duty of faith with concerns for the environment, affordable health care, education, the economy, for our nation's place in the world, and the myriad other existential public policy issues that affect our lives, the lives of our families, and the next generation. By all means, vote.
Welcome to another edition of TCR Dialogues. Over the last 2 months, we have brought to you conversations with politicians, pastors, and professors. And today we're talking with someone who is the epitome of ministerial activism. We're talking to Reverend A. Kazimir Brown. Now, of course, I know you guys were expecting to see Reverend Dr. William Barber II. He's actually been so busy today with back-to-back interviews and lives that unfortunately he won't be able to make our live, but he will be sharing a special video for us that will get us hyped for the upcoming election. So first of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Kiritiana Freeland, and I'm a journalist based in Rio de Janeiro, but my home church is Cary Temple AME Church in Chicago, where the Reverend Sheila Wilson Freeland is the senior pastor. Now, before we start, let's do a roll call. Please comment with your local church and Episcopal district. We want to see you guys. And also, please share this video on your personal pages. We want the world to see what we are doing. So let's get to our esteemed guest with us today. We have with us Reverend A. Kazimir Brown, who is the digital director of the Poor People's Campaign, and she serves on the staff of the Metropolitan AME Church in Washington, D.C. And of course, you know what, even though Reverend Dr. William Barber won't be able to join us, let me just introduce to you who he is, because a lot of her work is with him. Reverend Dr. William Barber II is the president and senior lecturer at Repairs of the Breach and co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And so welcome, Reverend Kazimir Brown. How are you? Thank you so much for coming with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so we actually have one tradition on the show. We always start the show with a question about your relationship to your faith and the church.
Absolutely.
So, Reverend Brown, I know you are a fellow AME just like me. How has your faith and the AME Church helped you to arrive at this point in your life and career?
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. Well, I grew up in San Francisco, so I attended Bethel AME. So I have always been in the AME Church, and it is in the AME Church that I have always understood my relationship with God as being through service and care for others. It was there, that has never been separated. Faith and social justice go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. And it's not surprising, because the mission of the AME Church is to minister to the social, spiritual, and physical development of all people. So for me, it went hand in hand. It was very natural. And I knew early on that I was going to be doing something career-wise, vocational-wise, professionally, that had to do with social justice.
And so tell me just about your journey to where you are today. I want to know just more about your personal journey to, you are a reverend with Metropolitan AME Church. How did you arrive there? And of course, we're going to follow that up with some more information about the Poor People's Campaign.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. So I would say being here as a reverend was not something that I imagined at all. So like I said, I grew up knowing that I was going to do something social justice oriented. And it was my junior year in college where I knew that I was going to do policy. I took a California policy class and I was like, oh, I want to do public policy. So I got my master's of public policy from the Goldman School of Public Policy at UC Berkeley. I had these wonderful positions working at the municipal level in San Francisco. I had the honor of serving in the Obama administration as well. And I just thought that I was going to live out my call with helping people get, a life full of flourishment through public policy. But it truly was. I will never forget the day. I remember going in, filling up like for tea, and looking at the news and seeing the Mother Emanuel shootings.
Mm-hmm. I remember that day too. I was in Brazil.
My world stopped. Like I just kept reading the line and I was like, this can't be happening. This can't be happening. Not at a Bible study. Not at a church. And so all these questions kept going around in my head. And through those next 3 or 4 weeks, the Lord was just tugging at me. And it was the eulogy of Reverend Pinckney that I realized, oh my goodness, I'm called to do public policy and ministry. There is no excuse. We have an example that he pastored and served at the state level. There was, for me, I had always saw them not separate, but like, oh, if you're going to do this career path, you do this, or if you do, if you're going to pastor, you do this. And for me, I'm like, no, it's combined. It always will be combined. And then I started on the process of going to divinity school and always trying to find ways to blend the two. And so for me, I've been very, very blessed to have people who have supported and affirmed that calling. And once again, in the AME Church, it's kind of seen as like, oh, of course, you're doing, social justice, and of course you're doing faith. So I have been very, very blessed to have support in that regard. But it was something that I did not expect, but very grateful for where I am now.
So how did you get to working with Bishop Barber? That's the next question.
So this is how God works. I remember when I was getting my master's of public policy, I was doing an internship in DC. And I remember reading an article of Bishop Barber doing the Moral Mondays in the South. And I was like, oh my goodness, that sounds amazing. And then I kind of just filed that away. I'm like, oh, that'd be nice to do. But, I guess that's not what I'm going to do. And fast forward, maybe 5 years later, I'm at divinity school and he's being interviewed by one of professors, Reverend Dr. Willie Jennings. And they're talking about, his life story. And he says that they're going to be launching something soon, this Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And I was like, I think I'm supposed to do that. And then a year later, I'm looking for a supervised ministry position where we combine our passions and we get real life experience. And I was telling one of the deans, Dean Gettler, I want to work with the Poor People's Campaign with Bishop Barber. He's like, well, that's the case. And then he helped navigate that because Bishop Barber was coming to the school to speak. And from there, I was able to serve as a student fellow for their first 40 days campaign in 2018. And it really has been from there. I've been, working as a student fellow. Then I came back and doing digital organizing, and then now serving as the National Director of Religious Affairs within the Repairs of the Breach and a Deputy Director for Religious Affairs in the movement. It's been very surreal. And it's been amazing to have, to be able to learn from his leadership and the many other leadership. Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris is a co-chair. We have Roz Pellis. We have Pastor Alvin Jackson. There's so many people that I'm learning from. And it's been amazing. It's been very rich.
Well, let's backtrack a little bit. You brought up Moral Mondays, and which probably some of our audience won't be familiar with. So I would love if you could explain what this project was that Bishop Barber started. And then can you actually explain to us what is the Poor People's Campaign? Because many of us are familiar with the Poor People's Campaign being something originally thought of by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
what is the connection to that campaign in the late 60s, obviously, to where we are right now, in current day, very turbulent times in United States?
Absolutely. So Bishop Barber started the Moral Mondays in the South and North Carolina, and it really was a response to what was happening politically at that time. So they, oftentimes when we think about people gathering, we might think about a one-time event. They went back every single month, I think for at least 13 Mondays in a row. And each single time they've had different issues that they were bringing up at a state level that was affecting people. And then you fast forward to today, and we have the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. So like you were saying, yes. So in 1968, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and many others started the Poor People's Campaign. And it was in the year before, in 1967, where Dr. King actually preached on Beyond Vietnam. And it was in that sermon that he preached at Riverside that he listed out these three evils: the evils of war, the evils of racism, and the evils of poverty. So that was 50 years, and you come back in 2018, and we're still dealing with the same things, just with a different spin on it. So we are here in 2020 with 140 million poor and low-income people in this country, 140 million. And that 700 people a day die because of poverty. Can we imagine 700 people a day? We're being wrecked by this pandemic of COVID, but we have a pandemic of poverty that is also interconnected with all these other interlocking injustices. So the movement is very much taking on the narratives of listing out the evils of the war economy, the systemic poverty, systemic racism, but also recognizing there's ecological devastation that is happening all around this world. There's fires in the Amazon. There's fires here in California burning. We have people who can buy unleaded gas but can't buy unleaded water. 13 million people can't afford their water bills. So we have ecological devastation, and we also have something with what we call the false moral narrative of religious nationalism. And some people are like, well, what is that?
I know a lot about that. I live in Brazil.
Yes, and so when I think about that, I think about how people have misused holy scriptures to propagate and oppress people. And that is not, as people of faith, that is not how we use the Holy Scriptures. When we don't look at when Jesus says the poor will always be with you, so we don't do anything about the poor. No, like we look at it and say, are we feeding one another? Are we clothing one another? There are so many. Jesus talked about the poor. Jesus cared for the poor. And we as people of faith and as folks who follow Jesus Christ are also called to serve and called to speak with and as poor people. And so the Poor People's Campaign looks at those 5 interlocking injustices, and we say the 140 million poor and low-income folks, they have a voice. And we need to center the demands of the people, because we believe when we lift from the bottom, everybody rises.
Now, I know that Black churches are going to support the Poor People's Campaign for sure. And I want you to actually tell us, how can Black churches support the Poor People's Campaign? Absolutely. But my sub question to that is that, has the Poor People's Campaign been able to, I don't know if the word is convert, but have you guys been able to target the ultra right religious who do use kind of moralism against to work against human rights? Like, how are you guys working to target that community as well, in addition to obviously the AME Church, which we're going to support you 100%?
Thank you. That's a great question, because one of the big tenets for the Poor People's Campaign is that we are a fusion movement. So when we say we're a fusion movement, that means we are actively, it is part of our roots in our DNA, where we're working with people across divides, the things that would try to split us, whether it is race or sexuality or geography or class or education, whatever it is, we are coming together to make sure that we are working together as a movement. So what we say is that when we're also nonpartisan. So we don't believe it's not about the left or the right, it's about right versus wrong.
Okay.
So when we talk about, what we stand for, we are speaking from a moral center. We're speaking from a center that is based in not just Christian values and morality, but we have an interfaith. We have everybody coming together, whether you're a person of faith or not of faith. And so one of the biggest tenets is to move as a moral fusion movement. And I would definitely have some things that we can talk about as far as ways to get involved. But I think that's a huge point, that we want to make sure that in this movement, we're not going towards, we're left, and this person's right. No, let's talk about right versus wrong. Because it's wrong for people not to have health care. It is wrong that we have, billionaires profiteering off a pandemic while we have people dying. We have people, millions, without a living wage. It is wrong not to be paid, 15 in a living wage. It is wrong that you can't work one job at minimum wage and pay for a 2-bedroom apartment in the country. There's not one county. That's wrong. Let's talk about that. And so I definitely can say a lot more, but what I love about the movement is that we have the reports, we have the stats, we have done the research to show what is it like in the United States right now. And when people say, we have this problem, we don't have the money, not true. We've done a poor people's moral budget, and we have seen where the money goes. And we can see that 53 cents of every taxpayer dollar goes to the war economy. It doesn't go to healthcare. It doesn't go to education. It goes to funding the war economy.
Oh gosh.
Yes.
The war economy. You mean
the war economy? So we have contractors that if you took away, if you reallocated that $29 billion contract to go somewhere else, imagine what we can do. And so that's why I love it, because when we say the problem, we also have a solution for it as well.
Now, I know that the Poor People's Campaign have been planning a huge march on Washington even before Black Lives Matter blew up again. How did you guys end up working in conjunction with the other movements that have gain popularity once again, not as they should gain popularity? And, is it difficult to work in conjunction with these groups, or is it difficult to access the Black community with all these groups kind of appearing to fight against similar things?
So what I really love, one, not just with the fusion movement that we're actually calling forth, and we have over 200 partners, and these partners are denominations like the AME Church, and we have partners who are religiously affiliated and non-religiously affiliated, and so we're coming together. We have fraternities and sorority groups. We have so many people coming together, and that's what we need. We need everybody in. We cannot be factioned off to say this movement's doing this, and so we can't do that. Or if I'm a part of this, then I also can't be a part of that. When we have the language of division, that goes to our disadvantage. And I do believe that we have far too many people with far too many backgrounds and passions to think that we're going to be depleted of our resources. We're a people where we've always had to be multifaceted. We've also had to have all these communal concerns come together. So to me, when I hear about these other movements, that's great. We need everybody in. If one speaks to you, wonderful. Okay. But to me, the foundation is working together towards a common agenda, working together for policies that are for the people. And actually, the Poor People's Campaign has a Jubilee policy platform where we outline in those 5 interlocking injustices the policies that we believe are going to raise everybody up, and that truly believes that everybody has a right to live. And so I would love to also talk a little bit more about what we've done recently. And we had a Voting is Power Unleashed, a mass moral assembly and teaching about voter protection and about voter participation. And I think we have the video for that too coming up.
Actually, we do have the video. Yeah. Can we go ahead and show this video?
Yes, and then after, I would love to go into some more details about that too.
Okay. You can continue to talk while the video.
Okay, yes. So in this was a longer teaching that we had. And I encourage everybody, if you go to vote.poorpeoplescampaign.org, you can see the full program. And it's really powerful. We have activists, we have artists, we have testimonies from those who are impacted. We even have a presidential candidate that spoke to the concerns of the 140 million poor and low income people in this country. So here we're going to see Bishop Barber open up this Voting is Power Unleashed.
Okay, you can keep on talking.
Great. So one of the things that I do want to say for the September 14th Voting is Power Unleashed is that we are in the midst of what we're calling the MORE campaign. And MORE stands for mobilizing, organizing, registering, and educating a movement that votes. And in this MORE campaign, we recognize that it is extremely important for us to, help with voter registration. But our work doesn't stop there. Our work is also encouraging people to fill out the census. We have until the end of this month. September 30th is the deadline. So we're focusing on voter registration, filling out the census, and also talking about a voting plan.
And on behalf
I think we have the video up.
Reverend Dr. Liz Theo
Great.
Harris, who also serves as director of Kairos Center Union, and all of our team and all of you, we welcome you tonight. First, I want you to tell people, text it out, push it out, tell them to go to vote.poorpeoplescampaign.org, vote.poorpeoplescampaign.org, or text to MORAL, M-O-R-A-L, to 66539. That's MORAL, M-O-R-A-L, to 66539. Brothers and sisters, I want to thank you for joining from all over the nation, from our state coordinating committees to the hundreds of partners and the thousands times thousands who have gathered to make this event possible. This gathering represents a historic coalition that has united to shift the balance of power in this nation. We must shift the narrative, and we must build power among poor and low wealth people and their allies, because we need a third Reconstruction in America. We need to face fully the interlocking injustices of systemic racism, ecological devastation, poverty, the war economy, militarism, and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism. And as you heard Reverend Dr. Alvin Jackson say, voting is indeed power unleashed. And before we talk about process, and before we talk about protections, and before we talk about platforms, I want to talk about power and why we must recognize this power, and it must be organized, and why this must happen. We began talking about power. There's a song entitled Nina Cried Power by Hosea, where it says, it's not the waking, it's the rising. It's not the waking, it's the rising. It's the grounding of a foot uncompromising. It's not foregoing of the lie. It's not the opening of the eyes. it's not the waking of the rising. And the suggestion of that song then says, and we can cry power. When we recognize that it is one thing to be awoke, it is one thing to wake up, and that is so important. But in a metaphorical sense, we also must get out of bed. And what it means to get out of bed, it means to challenge injustices, but it also means to exercise voting, because voting is power unleashed. When we talk about voting, we too often accept that the extremists have the power, or at least most of the power. But there are some things we need to clear up right here and right now. I want tonight to unleash us from all of the false narratives so that we can understand and have a deeper prophetic and political imagination. It's not the waking, it's the rising. But we can be woke and still in bed, but when we awake and we get out of bed and we move in every possible way nonviolent that we can change the country. You can know there is a problem in our democracy and still not engage. But when you know there's a problem and you connect faith and works together, then that's power. When we rise up, that's where real power begins. So let us be clear. There's so much power available. We should never start from the perspective of depression and a depressive mentality that says we don't have power. If we weren't powerful, they wouldn't be fighting so hard to suppress the vote. When we look at the election results, sometimes you'll hear people say 70% of these people voted for this candidate, or they'll say the polls say this person is leading by such and such a margin. But the truth of the matter is that those numbers are about those who have voted in the past, or they are about metrics based on predictions. Most of the time, it's not about all who could have voted or would have voted if not for voter suppression. Past results and polls based on past elections don't consider eligible voters who have sat out for years because they did not hear anyone talking about the issues that matter to them, like poor and low wealth people. So let us start here. In the last election, 100 million people who were eligible to vote didn't vote. That's an incredible amount of untapped power in the last election. More than the number of people who voted for either presidential candidate or party in any election in U.S. history did not vote. When we talk about winning and losing, we have to qualify that we had an election where someone won the Electoral College but did not win the popular vote. This has happened at least 3 times since 1876. We also need to stipulate that in the Midwest, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, the presidential election alone was determined by less than 100,000 votes. But in those same 3 states, 2.6 million poor and low-income people who could have voted didn't vote. We have power. Voting is power unleashed. We did a study because we wanted empirical data. We wanted to really understand what kind of power we could unleash in 2020 and beyond. So we did a study with professors from Columbia University, and this is what it found. It found that voting is indeed power unleashed. We found that there were 63 million poor and low-income voters in 2016. Nearly 30% of the electorate, I want you to hear that now, nearly 1/3 of the electorate is poor and low wealth. And many times we don't even hear poor and low wealth discussed in our political discourse. Middle class, wealthy, but 1/3 of the electorate is poor and low wealth. Of those 29 million voted, and 34 million poor and low income people of every race, creed, and color who were eligible to vote did not vote. This is not, the study found, because they are apathetic about politics, but because our nation's politics are often apathetic about poverty and the poor. We've got to dispel the myth of the so-called red maps that show so many poor counties in this country that are controlled by extremists. Those maps don't show the poor and low-income people preferred Trump over Clinton in 2016. They don't show that. As a matter of fact, if you look at voters who earn less than $50,000 per year, a study in the New York Times said that Clinton won that demographic by more than 10 percentage points. That's not partisanism, that's history. Poor counties and states are not struggling because poor people have chosen to be represented by political extremists who do not serve them and their families. They are represented by political extremists who keep them in poverty because their power has not been organized and exercised. Our study found that in 15 states, even in the South, poor and low-income people voting at the same rate as those with higher incomes would meet or even exceed the margin of victory in the 2016 presidential election. Let me name them for you. Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, New Hampshire, Arizona, Minnesota, Maine, Florida, New Mexico, North Carolina, Nevada, Georgia, Texas, Mississippi, and Ohio. In 13 of those states, these changes are possible even if a small percentage of poor and low-income people who didn't vote last time voted. And it's not even a majority. It's not even 40%. It's not even over 30%. If just 1 to 19%, in one place, 1 to 30% of those potential voters in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, New Hampshire, Arizona, Minnesota, Maine, Florida, New Mexico, North Carolina, Nevada, Georgia, and Texas were organized and vote for their agenda, they could fundamentally shift the outcomes from the governor's races to the U.S. Senate races to the presidency. But we know that if poor and low-income people are voting, if their issues and concerns around health and economic well-being are on the agenda, that will also drive other voters in their direction. And so poor and low-wealth people, they can become a pulling point for the rest of the nation. Galvanizing poor and low-income voters, 1/3 of the electorate, isn't about an act of charity. It is, in fact, what can and will save this democracy and our nation from falling into further crisis. We do not organize and speak to poor and low-income workers at the peril of this experiment called America. Now, half a century ago, Dr. King said in 1967, in our society, it's murder, psychologically and otherwise, to deprive a man of a job or an income. And we know that today, whether it's death from police brutality, COVID-19, poverty, not having PPEs, lack of health care, millions of people are crying, I can't breathe. Far too long in this nation, too many have refused to hear them. And it's time that our cries be turned into voting, because voting is power unleashed. Voter suppression, you need to know, those who engage in voter suppression, they also vote against police reform. They vote against living wages. They vote against health care. They vote against COVID stimulus. Those things that help all people. And then we must remember in 1965, as I conclude, what Dr. King told the movement at the end of the Selma to Montgomery movement. He said that every time there's a possibility for poor and white people to join together, particularly poor and low wealth black people and white people, the Southern aristocracy would deliberately sow division. He said that's what happened when the Negro and the white masses of the South threatened to unite and build a great society, a society of justice where none would prey upon the weakness of others. We can never forget. The division of racism is always used as a tactic to divide poor and low-income black, white, brown, and indigenous people, especially when they have the power to exercise their power. That's why at the Poor People's Campaign, we are intentional about bringing people together across all races, across all geographic lines. As they say up in Kentucky, from the hood to the holler, from Alabama to Appalachia, from Maine to Mississippi, from California to the Carolinas, from the Apache Nation in Arizona to the fast food workers in Missouri, from the Navajos to the farmers in Nevada and Oklahoma. We're bringing people together because voting is power unleashed. Look at the maps that you're going to see now. These maps show us that from Maryland to Texas, there are 193 electoral college votes. I want you to see this. 193 in just 15 states. That means that if any group can lock up these states, they only need 77 electoral college votes from the other 35 states to get to 270. But these are many of the same states with a small percentage of poor and low wealth people organized, with their faith advocates and labor advocates and civil rights advocates, could fundamentally change the outcome of the election. What else do we know about these same states? The same states since 2010 have passed racist voter suppression laws. You see the map? The same states that have engaged in racist voter suppression laws have caused people to get elected who, once they got elected, blocked living wages. Another map. Those same states blocked expansion of health care. So voter suppression is not just targeted at Black and brown people. It's targeted at Black and brown people, but ultimately it's targeted at the democracy, and it's targeted at progressive politics that could change the lives of all people. And this alone should let us know why we have to organize in a way that brings people together and shows them the racism of voter suppression is not just about Black and brown people, but fundamentally about the future of our democracy. Because when they target certain people for voter suppression and they suppress the turnout, they end up pushing public policy that hurts everyone, regardless of race, color, gender, or geography. Well, that's why we wanted to start here. Sure, we could have started with the platform and the plan, but first we want you to know you got power. Power. It's not the waking, it's the rising. We have power. Don't let anybody tell us we don't have power. I began by saying it. It's the rising. It's the rising because it's time for us to get our heads up and straighten out our backs. It's time for us to stop believing the hype about political races in this country. We really don't know what it would look like if everybody votes, because it hadn't happened. We really don't know what it would look like if poor and low income people would join together regardless of race and creed and color and demographics all over this country and vote their agenda. I say we see. I say since we have all this power, let's not leave it on the table. I say use it. And tonight is about learning how to use it. And tomorrow and the next 49 days are about doing it, rising up, rising together for a new day in America. Voting is power unleashed.
That was powerful.
Amen to that.
And can you explain how we can get involved with this?
Absolutely. So what I was saying for the MORE campaign right now, the mobilizing, organizing, registering, and educating people for a movement that votes. So if you want to get involved, go to vote.poorpeoplescampaign.org and you can sign up to become a MORE organizer. And if you are a part of a church, we would love for your church to sign up for the prophetic pledge, the 1,000 prophetic pledge. So we're reaching out to 1,000 faith organizations and 1,000 community organizations to come together, and each one of them will reach out to 1,000 people in their communities to help with voter turnout. Now, for some that might be thinking, oh, we can do 1,000, and others might think, oh, 1,000 might be a stretch. But this is what's important. Getting the conversation going. It's okay if you don't reach 1,000, but we know that at this point, every conversation counts because every vote counts. So we want you to sign up to be a part of the MORE organizing, be a part of the prophetic pledge. So if you go online, you can sign up. And then when you're signed up, we have trainings actually this week on Saturday and Sunday, and we will give you the tools to start reaching out to your community. Because we know voting registration is important, but we also have more that we have to do. We also have to be aware of the census. Oh my goodness, that is so important as far as how our municipalities are going to get funding. It depends on filling out the census. We have until the end of this month. So if you haven't done so already, fill it out. We also know that this year, the election is unlike anything we've seen before. So we're talking about a voter plan. We're having conversations with people as far as getting them prepared to vote, whether that's getting an absentee ballot or whether it's finding out their polls if they have to go in person. It is important that we spend some time thinking about our voting plan. And lastly, but extremely important, is about the policies in which we're voting for. we know that, yes, registration is important. Yes, we have to go out there and vote, but we have to go out there and vote for a vision, for policies that leave everybody being able to live and live abundantly. So when we're going out, we want to spend less time thinking about one candidate having everything together, but we really want to spend time thinking about what candidates are closely aligned to the policies for the people. Who is speaking to the 140 million poor and low-income people in this country? Who is directly addressing the needs of all people? So when we vote, we got a voting plan. We make sure we fill out our census, and we're making sure that we have policies for the people. And that's what this MORE campaign's about. We want you to come on board and be able to start those conversations, because we have work to do up until that election. And you know that this is just the beginning. As Bishop Barber was saying, we need people. It's not in the waking, it's in the rising. So we have to rise after that election, and we have to rise to make sure that our policies are being heard and our policies are being met. So if you can just go online, vote.poorpeoplescampaign.org, and sign up to be a MORE organizer. And if you're a part of a church, we would love for your church to sign up for the 1,000 prophetic pledge. And so we have a lot of different ways. A lot of that is also outlined on our website. And we also know that there are opportunities for people to serve as poll monitors. So we have particular states that we are doing a poll monitoring trainings: Alabama, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Michigan, Mississippi, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Texas. We know that we need people at the polls monitoring what is happening, because as we've heard, voter suppression is real and is keeping us from getting the things that we need to live and for everybody to flourish. And we know it's not just a one issue. Don't let them tell us it's just a one issue that we have to care about, because we saw in those maps that places that have voter suppression also suppress living wages. Mm-hmm. Places that have voter suppression also suppress healthcare access. So voting for this election is not just voting for this year, is not just voting for the next year. It's going to have an impact for generations to come. And that has how you can get involved with the MORE campaign.
Cool. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for that video. Like I feel inspired and I'm ready to vote right now.
Absolutely.
Let's switch gears right now, because I really want people to get to know you, Reverend Brown. I took the opportunity to listen to one of your sermons online. It was called What's Going On, named after the famous song by Marvin Gaye, What's Going On. And it was based on the Book of Lamentations. And there was a 3 lines that really caught my attention. You said this. You said, "We as Christians, we are called to bear witness to those who are suffering, a call that actively looks to partner in God's kingdom building, a call to love others as ourselves." Can you expound on this and expound on your message for the audience in this sermon? And yes, you can go see this sermon online. So Google her name and you'll see it.
Thank you. So as when I preached it then and even now in the Book of Lamentations, I believe very, very strongly in having space for communal lament. Oh my goodness, during a time where we have over 195, but I think pushing 200,000 deaths in a pandemic, when we have constant footage of people being killed and harmed, when we have people unhoused, but yet are being told to shelter in place, and they can't breathe, whether that's because of the pandemic, whether because there's a knee on their neck, or whether they're because the air quality is not suitable for breath. Mm-hmm. We are in a time of lament. And in that, I believe it is important for us to spend time there, because it's in that lament that we also have an opportunity to grow as a community. It is in that lament that we can share and carry each other's water. It is in that lament that we are able to have the fire and the energy to let us know that we will never go back to this again.
Mm-hmm.
It is taking those lessons of lament and carrying them forward. And so in that time, I was thinking, I had no idea this, the world would be where it is right now, but it's still very much, relevant today. And not only do we spend time in the lament and we are honest about how we're feeling, because how we're feeling, these things, these emotions, these feelings are God-given. God created us in God's image. So this anger, this joy, this celebration, this grief, these are all familiar to God. And I believe that it is important for us to share them, because in our sharing, in our testimony, that is where we're able to support one another. Mm. But in that, there is hope. In that, there is an opportunity for us to truly reach towards a kingdom where heaven is meeting earth. We are transforming earth in a way that really does reflect God's kingdom here. And so for me, I see the work with the movement very tied into that. When I think about caring for myself and when I think about caring for the community, yes, there is absolutely time. There's absolutely, we need space to care for ourselves and have that personal care and have that personal love. And we see that in Matthew 22, it says, love thy God with all thy heart, soul, and strength. But yet it also said, love thy neighbor as thyself. We have to spend time with knowing what it means to love ourselves, because it's from that then we are able to love our neighbors. And when we're able to love our neighbors, we're able to love our community at large. And when we're able to love our community at large, then we can also address the structures that our communities are living in. So I really feel that it flows from oftentimes spaces that we might want to move past, but it is in that time that we can actually grieve, we can actually celebrate, we can actually cry out, we can actually move forward, we can actually change what life looks like for us now and moving on in the future.
This actually flows perfectly into a question that I wanted to ask you and Bishop Barber. You talked about, Bishop Barber and you talked about, this summer being very difficult for us. We've had continued anti-Black police violence. We've seen environmental destruction. We've seen continued mismanagement of the COVID-19 health crisis. And, even recently, I was struck by the revelation that there is massive medical neglect of detained immigrants. Yes. So in the midst of this, you and Bishop Brown have been working hard as activists. How do you all take care of yourselves spiritually and mentally? And do you have any advice for those of us who may not be on the front lines, but we are still suffering?
Absolutely. Like I said, caring for oneself has to be prioritized. It is not something that's, a luxury. And oftentimes we live in a society where we think of sleeping's a luxury, or doing something for ourselves is a luxury. No, we have to be able to draw on from our own wells to be able to care for others. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I would say it has been a learning curve. We're 6 months into this pandemic, one of the pandemics, I would say. Mm-hmm. And I am constantly finding new ways to replenish. And so that comes with resting, that is sleeping, that is going outside and spending time in nature, that is being able to have virtual community or socially distanced community, whether it's a book club or whether it's being able to call on one of my friends and see how they're doing, or FaceTime a family member who just had a baby. for me, community is very important. And I know that I'm also a person that I love being face to face with a person. So I'm also doing an adjustment with the virtual, but I'm very grateful that we have this technology, that we're able to do this, that we're able to have worship services online, that we're able to have book clubs online, that we're able to call somebody who might be, down the way or across the country. And so I find myself replenishing in those ways. But I'll also say the work that I'm doing with the Poor People's Campaign, that energizes me. That fires me up. That gets me up. That is my rising. And so for those who might not, you were saying that are not on the front lines, I would say we are all on the front lines in different ways. Our vote is us on the front lines. And we have so many different ways that we can get involved, that we can do civic engagement that doesn't look the same for everybody. Some people are going to be protesting in the streets. Some people are going to be writing a letter to their representative. Some people are going to be hosting Facebook Lives for us to get the information to spread to other folks. We all are on the front lines here. We all have a part to play. And our vote is one of the most important ways for us to do that, because being able to vote will also allow us to change those structures, what then will allow us to also change how we interact with and how we go about self-care and communal care.
Thank you so much for that inspirational message. So the AME Church obviously was founded by Richard Allen in an act against social and racial injustice. And sometimes I wonder myself, this is my own personal opinion, I wonder if our church is as radical today as it was back then. So I would like to know your thoughts on the role of the AME Church in social justice policy today.
Absolutely. I see the AME Church as social justice ministry. We are, those things were tethered in the beginning, and they can't be untethered. So when I think about what is happening today, so many people are looking to faith communities. They're looking to the churches to say, where is this God of yours?
Mm-hmm.
What is God saying in the midst of this? And here we have a connectional church, which is extremely unique position, because we have a network of churches internationally that preach the gospel in a way that is not just, salvation is off in the distance. The salvation is here and now. It is lived experiences that matter just as much as, reaching towards heavenly goals. And so when I think about what the AME Church does with social justice, I see the AME Church as social justice. And we have so many different ways that the church has gotten involved. And there is so much more room for us to not just do the individual church ministries and the district ministries, but as a connectional church, what are we doing to change the structures? And I think we have to also keep in mind that when we talk about social justice, we have to have, some people say that all the flowers blooming at the same time. So yes, we need food pantries, and yes, we need shelters, and yes, we need clothing drives, and yes, we also need a church, a connectional church that is plugged in and tapped in to the policies that are going to change a city, that are going to change a state, that are going to change the country. So I very much see the AME Church as being able to pioneer that, because we're structured that way. And that's the beauty of it. We have the opportunity to truly, when people look back and say, what did the AME Church do during these pandemics? We can say, we did this. We called forth a bold prophetic plan. We made sure that people were at the polls. We made sure that the policies of tomorrow are going to be accessible for people generations to come. So I get really excited when I think about what the AME Church has done and what it's positioned to do in the future, because there is no limit. There is no limit about what we can do if we come together as a connectional body to preach the gospel and preach it in a way that truly does go to our mission of the social, the spiritual, and physical development of everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So let's talk gender issues. Many of today's racial injustice movements are in large part led by Black women and queer people. And when I look at the AME Church, I do see women in leadership positions, but oftentimes it appears that the church is largely led by men. So I would like to know, what has been your experience as a young woman in ministry and within the AME church culture?
Absolutely. That's a great question. For me, I have to start off by saying that I have been extremely blessed. I have had pastors, I have a presiding elder, I have a spiritual mother, I have a bishop that have been affirming and supportive in my calling. And I don't take that for granted. And matter of fact, when I grew up in, Bethel, AME, I saw women in the pulpit. I saw and heard women in the pulpit. And so when it came time for me to discern my own calling, I am beyond grateful that I was never hesitant about whether I should pursue a calling because I was a woman. I have never seen that as being a barrier, but I recognize that that is not the case everywhere. And I recognize the privilege that comes with that. But also in the AME Church, what is wonderful is that, yes, we have a history of women in ministry. Drina Lee's, yes, her call, even though at first it was being pushed back, her call opened the door for my call and opened the door for so many other calls and calls to come. And I also grew up seeing almost all positions of leadership having women in it. But I would say it wasn't until 2000 that the AME Church elected its first woman bishop, Bishop Vashti McKenzie. And so when I think about the opportunities that the AME Church has, that we can continue to build on our history, that expands to including more women, and it's including women as more bishops, appointed to presiding elders, charged to churches that are flourishing, and that we just don't limit ourselves to the gender binary, but are open and accepting and affirming of trans and non-gender conforming communities to serve and be represented in ministry. And so I really feel like that from my history of being affirmed in the AME Church as a woman in ministry, I believe lays the foundation for our church to really grow, to support, to affirm all those to come in their callings.
Wow, this is really inspiring. Looking forward to when you have your own church in the future. Though I'm going to stay with my mother's church. I can't be changing churches. We're actually wrapping up our discussion. But my last question for you, Reverend Brown, is just a quick question. You've obviously given us lots of advice on how we can support the Poor People's Campaign. But just quickly, what advice do you have for our church members and leaders on how they can up their social activism game up? How can they just really quickly just do something now and get on the front lines, though all of us are on the front lines? Where can they start?
So I would say if you sign up, vote.poorpeoplescampaign.org, that will start you right there. We have a training tomorrow to get you started reaching out to your communities, because we can't assume that, everybody hears about the election, everybody's going to vote. We have to have those conversations with our communities. And that is as simple as picking up the phone and calling somebody and asking them. You can, if you have social media platforms, start watch parties with, programs like this, but also the debates are going to be coming up soon. Listen to what the candidates are saying, not just at a presidential level. Listen to what your state candidates are saying. What are your local candidates are saying? Because we know that the decisions are made from local municipalities all the way up, and we can't just focus in on one election. You can also fill out your census. Fill it out before September 30th. You are helping yourself, you are helping your community, and you're helping for the next 10 years of funding for your community by just taking those few minutes and filling it out. So we'd love to have you join as a more organizer. You can be a poll monitor, but there's so many ways. And I would also encourage folks to read up on the issues. We have quite a bit of reports on poorpeoplescampaign.org that outline everything from a budget, that outlines how our country has shifted and shaped and been molded for the past 50 years. We have also have a wonderful report outlining the power that we have, that Bishop Barber was saying, that because we have power and we see that there's at least 10 to 15 states that if you mobilized 1% or 20% of voters, of low income and poor voters, they can change the electorate. So having that knowledge is so important to be spread. And so we can also challenge and question those who are representing us to make sure they're addressing the needs of all people.
And we actually had one more question for you that I really wanted to ask, but I think you partly answered it beforehand. If you had the opportunity to design a social justice ministry for AME Church, what would it look like? And I would actually like to know, would it be different for a church with predominantly white people?
So when I think about you said it's like a social justice ministry?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I would also go back and say the whole church should be a social justice ministry. There should be no part of it that is separated from caring for every single person. And I would say when it comes to who is in your congregation, I think that one of the principles that I really believe in is that having the issue areas be interlocking. So when we are talking about social justice, you can't talk about, helping one area without also talking about systemic racism. You have to address the history of systemic racism, because that also allows you to understand the history of poverty, which also allows you to understand the history of the war economy, ecological devastation, how religious texts have been twisted in order to oppress and suppress instead of uplift. And so when I think about designing a social justice ministry in the AME Church, I would say we are that social justice ministry. Everything we do should be focusing on caring for the least of these, that are caring for our community. And our community is a global community. And regardless of what your church demographics look like, we should all be caring for our community. And some of us might have to tap into different histories and learn about those truths, but we have to do that work. So I truly believe that when we say we have a social justice ministry, that is the church, and not just a church, but the church at large.
Thank you so much. Do you have any parting comments before we head off to our announcements?
I am so grateful to be here. Thank you so very much for this opportunity. We are excited. We're in such an unprecedented time, a critical time, but a time that is a Kairos time, a time where we can truly change what comes next. And so please vote, vote, vote. Fill out your census. There's not anything that's too little that can actually, there's nothing too little at this point, because every conversation, every piece of information that you're learning and you're spreading and you're sharing matters. And so I hope you go out there and you vote. Early voting is an option for folks, if you can do that too. And join us with the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival.
And for those who are watching, please share this video on your personal page. That's the way to get the word out. You can help. You're on the front lines too. So a couple of announcements. On Monday, we actually have another TCR dialogue with Reverend Dr. Michael Waters, who is the pastor of Abundant Life AME Church in Dallas, Texas. He's going to be talking about his new book, For Black Boys Who Believe in a Better World. Then the next Monday, we actually have an exciting roundtable that we're producing in partnership with AME V-Alert. We will have 5 different AME state legislators talking about the 2020 elections, down ballot impacts, public policy, and other topics. And this will be moderated by fellow journalist Chuck Hobbs. Now, to our most important announcement, we really would love for you guys to support the Christian Recorder, which is the oldest continuously running Black publication in the United States. As the editor, John Thomas III, always says, we would encourage you to buy a subscription which is $36 a year. And you can visit the website to buy the subscription. And we also would love for you to support AME Church Publishing House for your church, school, and worship needs. We have a new product called the Empowerment Syllabus that you can get at amecpublishing.com. And so next up, we have another PSA.
When you think about power, think about voting. When you move to protect those you love, add voting to your list. When you act to eliminate injustice, join AME The Alert. Get your friends, family, neighbors, church members, and all to vote. It's our time. Hashtag join AME The Alert.
So I want to thank you so much, Reverend Brown, for making all of this happen. And please support the Poor People's Campaign. With all of your support, please sign up at vote.poorpeoplescampaign.com. And just thank you so much for all of your comments. And obviously, we will see you next Monday.
And in the movement, we say forward together, not one step back. Bishop and I thank you. The movement thanks you for this opportunity.
And we also want to thank our sponsors. We have some special sponsors who will be running for bishop next year. We have Dr. Sylvester Beeman for bishop in 2021. And we have Dr. Marvin Sanders, who will be running for bishop in 2021. Thank you so much for joining us.